Why can't I do anything? Why do I feel, in the face of all the problems of the world, impotent? And why, somehow, can't I manage to transform? Now, here we get to the real problem, because we're always telling each other that we should be different. I'm not going to tell you that tonight. Why not? Because I know you can't be. Nor can I. That may sound depressing, but I'll show you it isn't. It's very heartening. But everybody you see who is at all sensitive and awake to their own problems and human problems is trying to change himself. We know we can't change the world unless we change ourselves. If we are all individually selfish, we're going to be collectively selfish. If we don't really love people and only pretend to, somehow we've got to find a way to love. After all, it's said in the Bible, "Thou shalt love the Lord thy God, and thy neighbor as thyself." You must love. We all agree, sure, but we don't. In fact, one psychologist very smartly asked a patient, "With whom are you in love?" And this particularly becomes appalling when we enter into the realm of higher things, by which I mean spiritual development. Everybody these days is interested in spiritual development, and wisely so, because we want to change our consciousness. Many people are well aware that this egocentric consciousness is a hallucination, and they presume it's the function of religion to change it, because that's what the Zen Buddhists, yogis, and all these people in the Orient are doing. They're changing their state of consciousness to get something called satori, a mystical experience, or nirvana, or moksha, or what have you. And everybody around here is really enthused about that, because you don't get that in church. I mean, there have been Christian mystics, but the church has been very quiet about them. In the average church, all you get is talk. There's no meditation, no spiritual discipline. They tell God what to do interminably, as if he didn't know. And then they tell the people what to do, as if they could or even wanted to. And then they sing religious nursery rhymes. And to cap it all, the Roman Catholic Church, which did at least have an unintelligible service, which was, well, it was real mysterious and suggested that some bad magic was going on there. When they put the thing into bad English, they took away the incense, and they became a bunch of Protestants. It was a terrible. So now, all these Catholics are at loose ends. It's clear they've been loosened up, but she said, it's no longer possible to practice contemplative prayer mats as you're being advised, exhausted, edified all the time. And it becomes a bore. Think of God listening to all those prayers. We do have to think about grieving the Holy Spirit. It's just awful. People have no consideration for God at all. But in pursuing these spiritual disciplines, yoga, Zen, and so forth, and also psychotherapy, there comes up a big difficulty. And the big difficulty is this. I want to find a method whereby I can change my consciousness. But to improve myself, the self that needs to be improved is the one that is doing the improving. And so I'm rather stuck. I found out that the reason I think I believe in God is that I sure hope that somehow God will rescue me. In other words, I want to hang on to my own existence. And I feel rather shaky about doing that for myself, but I just hope there's a God who will take care of it. Or, if I could be loving, I would have a better opinion of myself. I'd feel better about it. I could face myself, as people say, if I were more loving, then the unloving me, somehow, by some gimmickry, has to turn itself into a loving me. And this is just like trying to lift yourself off the ground with your own bootstraps. It can't be done. And that's why religion in practice mainly produces hypocrisy and guilt, because of the constant failure of these enterprises. People go and study Zen, and they come back and say, "Wow, getting rid of your ego is a superhuman task." I assure you, it's going to be very, very difficult to get rid of your ego. You have to sit for a long time, and you're going to get the sorest legs. It's hard work. And all you wretched kids, you think you're getting rid of your ego on some part of something or other in easy yoga. You don't know what you're in for when it really comes down to the nitty-gritty. But the biggest ego trip going is getting rid of your ego. And the joke of it all is, your ego doesn't exist. There's nothing to get rid of. It's an illusion, as I've tried to explain. But You still want to ask, how do I stop the illusion? And who's asking? I mean, do you think, in the ordinary sense in which you use the word I, that how can I stop identifying myself with the wrong me? But the answer is simply, you can't. The Christians put this in their way when they say that mystical experience is a gift of divine grace. Man, as such, cannot achieve this experience. It is a gift of God. And if God doesn't give it to you, there's no way of getting it. Now, that is solidly true. You can't do anything about it because you don't exist. Well, you say, that's pretty depressing news. But the whole point is, it isn't depressing news. It is the joyous news. There's a Zen poem that puts it like this, talking about the mystical experience, the Satori, the realization that you are the eternal energy of the universe, like Jesus did. It says, you cannot catch hold of it, nor can you get rid of it. In not being able to get it, you get it. When you speak, it is silent. When you are silent, it speaks. Now, in not being able to get it, you get it. Because this whole feeling is what Krishnamurti is trying to explain to people. For example, when he says, why do you ask for a method? There is no method. All methods are simply gimmicks for strengthening your ego. So, how do we not do that? You're still asking for a method. There is no method. If you really understand what your I is, you will see there is no method. This is so sad. But it's not. This is the gospel, the good news. Because if you cannot achieve it, if you cannot transform yourself, that means the main obstacle to mystical vision has collapsed. That was you. What happens? You can't do anything about it. You're at your wit's end. What are you going to do? Commit suicide. But supposing you just put that off for a little while. Wait and see what happens. You can't control your thoughts. You can't control your feelings. Because there is no control. You are your thoughts and your feelings. And they're just running along, running along, running along. You just sit and watch them. There they go. You're still breathing, aren't you? Still growing your hair. Still seeing and hearing. Are you doing that? I mean, is breathing something that you do? Do you organize the operations of your eyes and know exactly how to work those rods and cones in the retina? Do you do that? It's a happening. It happens. So, you can feel all this happening. You are breathing. It's happening. Your thinking is happening. Your feeling is happening. You're hearing, you're seeing. The clouds are happening across the sky. The sky is happening blue. The sun is happening shining. There it is. All this happening. And may I introduce you? This is yourself. This begins to be a vision of who you really are. And that's the way you function. You function by happening, that is to say, by spontaneous occurrence. And this is not a state of affairs that you should realize. I cannot possibly preach it to you, because the minute you start thinking, I should understand that, this is the stupid notion again that I should bring it about, when there is no you to bring it about. That's why I'm not preaching. You can only preach to egos. All I can do is talk about what is. It amuses me to talk about what it is because it's wonderful. I love it, and therefore I like to talk. If I get paid for it, I make my living. Sensible people get paid for doing what they enjoy doing. So, this whole approach is not to convert you, not to make you over, not to improve you, but for you to discover. If you really knew the way you are, things would be sane. But you see, you can't do that. You can't make that discovery because you're in your own way. As long as you think, I'm I, as long as that hallucination sticks, and the hallucination disappears only in the realization of its own futility. When at last you see, you can't do it. You cannot make it's very commonly said that the root of most human unhappiness is the sense that one's life has no meaning. This is, I suppose, most frequently said in circles interested in psychotherapy, because the feeling of meaninglessness is often equated with the existence of neurosis. And so many activities into which one is encouraged to enter, philosophies one is encouraged to believe, and religions one is encouraged to join, are commended on the basis of the fact that they give life a meaning. And I think it's very fascinating to think out what this idea itself means, or what it is intended to convey when it is said that life has to have a purpose. I remember so well, as a child, listening to sermons in church in which the preacher would constantly refer to God's purpose for you and for me, and I could never make out what it was because, when questioned about this, the reverend gentleman seemed to be evasive. What is the purpose of God for the world? We used to sing hymn too. God is working his purpose out as the year succeeds a year. And the nearest clue one got to it was in the sort of refrain of the hymn. Nearer and nearer draws the time that shall surely be, when the earth shall be filled with the glory of God, as the waters cover the sea. And of course, that raises the question, what is the glory of God? Well, now, it's pretty obvious, I think, that when we talk about life having or not having a meaning, we are not using quite the ordinary sense of the word meaning as the attribute of a sign. We are not saying, are we? That we expect this natural universe to behave as if it were a collection of words, signifying something other than themselves. It isn't a point of view which would reduce our lives and the world merely to the status of signs. And it's obviously in some different sense than that Goethe wrote his famous lines at the end of Faust. Alles Vergang which ist nur ein Gleichnis. Forgive my pronunciation of German. All that is mortal, or all that is perishable, is but a symbol. And so, a symbol of what? What do we want to feel? What would satisfy us as being the meaning behind this world? It's so often, that we don't follow our ideas and our desires through. Most of the things that we want very fervently are things that we have only half glimpsed. Our ideals are very often suggestions, hints, and we don't really know exactly what we mean when we think about it. But there is this obscure sense in which we feel that life ought to have significance, and be a symbol in at least that sense, if not just so arid a symbol as a mere sign.